What's our vision for our next year? It's time to really start upping the knowledge. What do we want to learn about within family business next year? The Vanderbilts, who generated a ton of wealth to the point where I believe that they were the wealthiest family in the world for a period of time. Ultimately, they lost all that wealth over the period of a few generations simply because they didn't prepare. We need to prepare the next generation to take on leadership and to take on ownership. If we are not preparing the next generation, then we are preparing ourselves for failure. Strengthen the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle in your family business. This is Fearless Family Business. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fearless Family Business Show. My name is Adam Hill, and I'm really excited that you're here today because today I want to share with you some of my favorite books that have to do with family business. And these were some of the books that I've read in 2024, or maybe a couple of years ago, that I think would be great for your reading list in 2025. Now that we're winding down 2024 and we're starting to get into the holiday season and the gift-giving season, of course, and getting into the season of, well, what are we planning for next? What's our vision for our next year? I mean, it's time to really start maybe upping the knowledge. What do we want to learn about within family business next year? What non-traditional kinds of lessons do we want to learn that we can tie into our business or our families or both so that we can improve the quality of our business and, of course, level up the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle that we have in our family businesses? So I have compiled a list of my 5 favorite family business books that I've read over the last couple of years that have contributed the most to just leveling up my business, my life, and helped me to gain a better perspective on where we're at. Now, full-on disclaimer here. Some of the books that I'm going to share with you today are not family business books. In fact, most of them are not. A few of them just have to do with the periphery of family or talk about generational issues or maybe talk about psychology. But in essence, if we can read them from the right perspective, you can actually gain a lot from these books. And I'd really be interested to hear, because I've only picked out 5 today, but there's a lot of books out there, a lot of reading material on how we can improve our businesses. I would love to hear from you and maybe share on a future episode what some other books are, what some other resources are, maybe some favorite shows or movies that you've watched that have had a huge impact on your family business. And those shows had better not be Succession or Arrested Development, because I don't think that those are going to have a good impact unless they're showing you what not to do, of course. But without further ado, I'd really like to get into the 5 books that have really reshaped the way I've looked at family business. And the first one that I'm going to share with you is really from more of a traditional perspective of succession planning or legacy planning, or how we transfer wealth. Of course, as we know, within family business, if you're keeping it within the family, making sure that you're putting your trusts in place and is planning for your estate, making sure that you have succession plans in place for that wealth transfer is incredibly important. And there are a ton of books and a ton of resources out there to help you do just that. And of course, if you are trying to look into how to plan your estate or transfer your wealth going forward, I would really recommend you hire an attorney. But I'm going to share with you a resource, a book that has really changed a lot of my thought process on what you should go into legacy planning. And that book I've heard a lot recently too. That book is called Entrusted by David York. Now, David York is an attorney. He's an estate attorney who has really worked in this industry for a long time. And the premise of Entrusted is that, we need to plan better for our estates. We need to plan better for our legacy. And ultimately, the way that we are doing estate planning is wrong and it's broken. And we need to try to fix it. And what's great about this book is that York goes into a lot of examples throughout our history of how estate planning has maybe gone wrong or how it's gone right. And he uses the example of the Vanderbilts, who generated a ton of wealth to the point where I believe that they were the wealthiest family in the world for a period of time, if not the United States. And And ultimately, they lost all that wealth over the period of a few generations simply because they didn't prepare. And that's one of the key themes of Entrusted, is that it provides a framework, advice on how to make that legacy and that wealth transition stick. And a lot of times, a lot of times the problem is, and the problems that York puts forward is that legacy plans or wealth transfer plans or estate planning goes wrong because of a few primary reasons. Sometimes we want to hide the idea of our wealth or hide the plan from the next generation. So we don't want to tell them at all because we're afraid that we're making people entitled in the next generation. So the way that we combat that is to not communicate at all what we're doing, which when you think about it that way is pretty ridiculous. And another thing that we do is maybe we just gift it all away without thinking or without putting any real thought into how we're transferring that wealth to the next generation. And in both of those instances, what we have is a lack of preparation. And so David York uses the analogy of building a bridge. And with building that bridge, we have to look at both sides of the equation. The equation that is actually transferring the wealth, which is that leadership, that ownership generation, and the next generation, and making sure that they are well prepared. And this book, Entrusted, offers a framework on how to do just that. So what the book really entails is he really tries to go into detail on how we can prevent the idea of entitled families and promote the idea of entrusted families, families that are communicating well, that put these plans in specific structures and make it so that those are bulletproof transition plans so that our wealth goes on for generation. And here's why that's relevant for family businesses. I mean, it may be obvious for why it's relevant to family business, because we want that family wealth to endure. But for the business in particular, the business is that vehicle that drives the creation of wealth. So preparation for the next generation is a vital element. It's probably one of the most important elements that goes into multi-generational businesses. If we are not preparing the next generation, then we are preparing ourselves for failure. We need to prepare the next generation to take on leadership and to take on ownership of the assets that we carry and that we put so much value in, because we are employing so much of the world's workforce that it is our responsibility and our obligation to make sure that the next generation is prepared to manage that wealth effectively, to make sure that it remains and it continues to persist and fuels that economic engine that is the family business. That's why it's relevant. And that's why that's the first book on my reading list for 2025, Entrusted by David York. The next book on my books for you to read in 2025 related to family business, this one is a no-brainer, my friends. This one is the Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook. And as the name suggests, this is literally the handbook for how to structure, how to build, how to manage that family business, from structuring the business as a whole around family ownership and the whole governance, to wealth transfer, again, talking about how we can transfer that wealth effectively, to building a family office and everything in between. This has it all. And going through this book, it literally is a handbook on how to manage some of these things. So if you run into any challenges, or if you're running into family conflict, chances are you could thumb through this book and find a place in this book that tells you how you can work through some of those challenges. Some of the elements of this book are like the 5 rights of family owners, that talks about what rights we should have as owners of a business to fuel our business. And the reason that's important is because if we're going to ignore our rights, chances are if we don't put boundaries around what our ownership represents, and we don't put rules and specific ways of managing our ownership, well, then it just runs rampant, and then we end up kind of lacking the structure. And when we lack the structure, it kind of falls apart. So those 5 rights of the owners are: we get to decide how we design. what that ownership looks like. We get to decide, make the major decisions within the company and make sure we know what those decisions are that we're making in the company. We get to define the value. We get to determine what the value in the business is and how it gets distributed and on an ongoing basis. We get to guide the information. How is information distributed among owners? And we get to transfer. How is the wealth transferred? How is the business transferred? What is the succession plan? And if we take those rights and we turn those into a clear structure and a clear procedure and a process, and if we decide what all of those elements are, well, then we have more structure in place to make sure that we're successful, because if we get the structure, we have the foundation to have a successful business. And it also introduced in this book is the idea of the 4 rooms in business. And those 4 rooms are kind of an offshoot of one of the very popular frameworks within family business that was created also by Harvard Business back in the 1970s, called the 3 circles model. That 3 circles model includes family, ownership, and the business. And it really defines that each of those should be separate but ultimately relevant entities within our business. Now, this book, the Family Business Handbook, takes it a step further and actually talks about the 4 rooms in family business. So the 4 types of rooms. Those rooms are the owner room, which is where all of the owners exist. It is the boardroom, where the managing people on the board of directors or the board of advisors might exist. It's the management room. Who are the leaders in the organization that are working in that? And there's the family room. Who is the family that's represented? And of course, some of those individuals can be in multiple rooms, but at any given time, you can only be in one room at a time, right? Representing what you are. So it keeps everything more compartmentalized in that. And so this handbook actually, it's a very, very clearly, very simply written book by Josh Barron and Rob Lachenauer. I think that's how you pronounce his name. And it really just provides a simple framework for how to run, how to structure, how to govern the family business. And so if you are, really at those beginning stages of building a family business, or if you are many generations down the line and just need to make sure you're getting everything firmed up, this is a great resource to just help you to thumb through, not only to read one time through, but also to reference time and time again on the key elements of how a family business is governed. Please pick this book up. It's a really good one for family business and how to do it. Now, the third book I want to get into, this is where we kind of stray away from more of the traditional family business books, but this one is probably one of my favorite books that I've read. And it is probably one of my favorite books that's relevant to family business in general. And you may be wondering why it's relevant, but it is. And this one's called The Fourth Turning. Now, I first learned about The Fourth Turning, which was written by Neil Howe and William Strauss. I first learned about The Fourth Turning through a Tony Robbins event, actually. And Tony Robbins was interviewing, I believe it was Neil Howe. And they were talking about what The Fourth Turning was. And to me, the whole title sounded like a conspiracy theory book, if I'm being honest. The Fourth Turning sounds like either a thriller novel or a conspiracy theory. But when I got into it, when I started to learn about it, what the subtitle is, "What the Cycles of History Tell Us About America's Next Rendezvous with Destiny." But the more I learned about this, the more I realized that this truly is a prophecy book, and it's a prophecy that's based on the cycles of generations in the United States. In particular, the authors go back in time, many, many generations, back to, I think, if it's back to the beginnings of the United States, back in the 1600s, when the Pilgrims first came into our country, and the first Europeans started to show up here. It talks about the idea that there are really 4 cycles in our world, and it's a cyclical generation pattern that really encompasses about 80 to 100 years at a time. And what those cycles are called turnings. So within those 4 turnings, there is a certain psychology or a certain set of behaviors that is recurring. And what is great about that model is that over time, over the course of many generations that have been observed since the foundings of the United States, we have observed that with ridiculous amounts of reliability, that there's really 4 sets there's really a cycle of those 4 generations that come and history does kind of repeat itself. For example, we've had a series of crisis eras that existed, such as our Revolutionary War, our Civil War, World War II, and more recently, the very crisis that we're going through now, which at the time of this book that they didn't even predict yet. Oh yeah, by the way, I should probably add, this book was written in the early 90s. This book was written before, while we were in a certain period. It predicted the fact that we may be in another crisis within the time period that we're in now. But the whole premise of it is these 4 turnings are a first turning, which really is a period where we have a lot of prosperity, a lot of strong institutions, and we have a lot of growth, and people are just more collectively together during that first turning. Think about this in terms of maybe the last point that happened, post World War II, when we came out of this massive crisis, which was a global war. We came back home, and there was a period of prosperity where there was a period where we had this strong institutional mindset where people were more connected than ever, and it was people were willing to work more as a team to make the world a better place. And then the second turning came along, where the children of that generation became a period of more of a cultural upheaval and questioning of authority. Think about that in terms of the 1960s, the Vietnam War and all of the protests, the civil rights movement, all of those things where upheaval was happening and we were almost transforming, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad. But all of those things were kind of an upheaval. And then we had the third turning, which is more of an unraveling. That's the generation that comes after that awakening generation, that unraveling period where individualism starts to kind of become more of the theme. We're no longer this collective unit, but we're becoming more individualized, and we're beginning to see more of an institutional decline where government is bad or where these kinds of things happen. And then that descends really more into that crisis point when there's a time of massive upheaval where something bad, like just some kind of major conflict happens that sends us into turmoil. It could be a global war. It could be a pandemic. It could be things like that, or it could be just like a massive financial downturn. And when you think about it that way, you really see how those generations form up, and that's been a theme, not just in this most recent saeculum, back from the World War II to where we are now, where we're in that crisis moment again. But if you go back through the generations, in the ones that preceded the Civil War and came after the Civil War and the Reconstruction, or after the Revolutionary War and how we built the nation after that, those are the kinds of things that repeat themselves, and it gives us a greater predictor on what we can expect next. And so there's a few generational archetypes within those generations, and those are the hero, which comes at that first turning kind of moment. There's the artist, which is in that awakening moment. There's the prophet, which happens in that kind of unraveling, and then there's the nomad that comes within the crisis. And I explained that a lot. I talked about that a lot, and I appreciate you hanging with me on that, because here's why it's relevant to family business. So I come from a 4th generation family company. a company that has essentially, it's been around for over 100 years. It has ran a saeculum. And as I'm reading this book, I am clearly seeing the same dynamics occur within our business as did within the broader culture of the United States and these and this saeculum of 100 years that we're talking about. I have seen how the leaders of the organization or the owners or each generation has personified all of those types of generational archetypes. And so what that's done is it's given me a better perspective as a leader within that crisis generation to understand that things within a family business are not going to run linearly. They are not going to shape out the same way that they did for our fathers or our mothers' generation. They are going to shape out much differently because of the type of environment that we're coming up in. And if we can better predict what's going to happen in those behavioral patterns, we can better run our business. We can better work with the generations that come into those into those worlds. We can better shape our future and create a vision that is represented by what we can expect in the next turning. And so I highly recommend you pick up The Fourth Turning and also the supplemental books. Here's bonus extra credit. There is a more recent book, I think, that was written in the early 2020s called The Fourth Turning is Here by the authors as well. And it kind of describes what's shaped out over the course of the last 25, 30 years since they wrote this book. This is going to give you a great perspective on how it shapes out. Really suggest you read The Fourth Turning. Now, the fourth book that I'm going to share with you, I don't have a copy of it because I listened to this on Audible, so I didn't have one. I didn't have it on hand, but the book is called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And I know when I say that title, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, I know that maybe some parents might get a little bit hurt by hearing that. And here's the reason why I bring it up. I don't bring it up for the generation that was preceding or that may be the parents in that equation. Who I'm bringing this up to is those so that those that are in the situation of maybe coming into leadership can have that self-awareness to know where they're feeling. I almost don't really like the title of this book, but I love this book because it goes into so much great detail about the impact of how we are all affected by the decisions of our parents and how they impact us and how they shape our decisions and the way we are, even the ways in which our parents want to protect us or make us better. And this is one of those books that, isn't directly related to family business, but the way but because it is more of a psychology around family dynamics, it helps us to understand how those relationships can exist and how we can make them better and how we can become self-aware to do that. So what it talks about some of those traits of emotional immaturity and where we might find that. And if you're in a family business, chances are somewhere within the organization, especially if you go down the generational line far enough, you're going to find some emotional immaturity, maybe even in yourself, dare I say it. And it's good to find out where that is. Is it self-centeredness, lack of empathy, poor emotional regulations, or just a level of narcissism? Looking at those things, you may be able to get self-aware of where you can improve, or where you could see it in others and respond accordingly, and how that impacts adult children when they come into leadership. I know for many of us coming into leadership in family businesses where we've been born into it, where we've been raised into it, coming into a situation where we're no longer an employee or a son or daughter of in an organization, but now we are the leader. We are the person who is in charge. The dynamic shifts. It gets lonely, and there is an element of feeling a sense of worthiness there. And by its very nature, we may deal with some immaturity there that we need to address. And maybe it might be our own. And that's why it's so important to look at this for the sake of others who might be experiencing that level of emotional immaturity or within ourselves. And it gives this book also gives some real great tips and strategies for how to grow through that, how to distinguish that emotional maturity from immaturity in ourselves and in others. It helps us to create the right kind of boundaries. Now, boundaries are difficult to build in a family business because of that overlap between family and business, but they're also critical. Boundaries are vital for business and vital for family business. So it will help you to put in healthy boundaries in the right kinds of way. And again, fostering that self-awareness so that you can pick it up in yourself when something might be affecting you in terms of that emotional maturity. And one of the styles of therapy that is brought up in this book is internal family systems, which is all about parts work and working out the parts within you. And that is a great model for how to look at areas of ourselves that might be might be affecting us negatively or might be limiting us. But when we can gain, and here's why this book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, is important for family business, and I think should be required reading for all family business leaders and employees, is because it offers not just that self-awareness it offers that opportunity to become self-aware of where emotional immaturity might exist within yourself, within family members, how to address it in the right way. And once you can unlock that, once you can not just be self-aware of it, but also work on ways to set up boundaries, you create more freedom for yourself as the leader. You create freedom by being self-aware. You create freedom by setting up the appropriate boundaries. And ultimately, you're going to perform better in those scenarios. So it helps to really create a better culture if you can start first by becoming self-aware. And this book will help with becoming self-aware. And that, of course, leads to the last book that I want to share with you, which is not necessarily a family book either, but it is a great business book. In fact, it's my favorite business book and probably one of the better systems books that was ever written, by Gino Wickman, the book Traction. Now, I read this one a few years ago, but I've read it a few times since. I've even read it within the last few months again, because the tools that are presented in this book, and if you don't know, Traction by Gino Wickman is the foundation for the entrepreneurial operating system, which is a system for how we can run business that can help you generate, or they can help you get better at the three things we call vision, traction, and healthy. Now, before I read this book, I really struggled to find my identity as a leader within our organization. I was floundering in that position, really struggling to get alignment within the business, really struggling with, just with a lot of, just with a lot of stuff in the business. And I just felt like I was taking on all of the roles in the organization, and I just didn't have the freedom or the mental capacity to really do what I needed to do well. And when I read Traction, we hired an implementer. We started implementing the process of EOS. I realized that the tools that are presented in this book are game-changing for business. No book or no set of tools or principles has had more of an impact on my business and my life than the book Traction. I would even say, for family business in particular, the reason that it's relevant for family business is because in a family business, it is as I shared earlier, it's really difficult to set those boundaries, really difficult to manage some of the personalities and make sure that we're keeping separated the idea of family, ownership, and the business. Traction is a book, and EOS is a system that fully helps to operate that business part of the three circles model. You can inject that entrepreneurial operating system into the business, the tools that are introduced in Traction, into the business side. And it creates discipline and accountability so that whatever vision is established within the ownership structure, within the business, that it is taken to the ground level and it's executed on effectively with discipline and accountability. It breaks through. It gives you the opportunity to address the difficult conversations that you might not have had you not have a system. Would you not have a system like this? So it's a really important way to have a system that sits on top of the business, that frees the entrepreneur or the family business leader up to not have to be in the trenches of all of the family dynamics and all that stuff. Trust me, that still exists. But if you all can agree and be aligned around this common system, or any system in general, whether it's EOS or anything, a system that promotes accountability and discipline and structure, well, it takes the weight of that decision making off of that leader, so that the decisions that are made that impact the owners, the family, all that kind of stuff does not feel like such a heavy weight on the one person. It aligns the leadership team, so you just become all one unit, and it just creates better freedom. So that's why Traction is so important. Pick up Traction if you haven't read it yet. And, if you'd actually like a copy of Traction, I would be happy to send you one. If you message me, send me a message, just say, I love a copy of Traction. Please send one to me. I will send you one for free. Make sure you include your address, because otherwise I won't know where to send it, of course. But yeah, definitely do that, because I've fallen so much in love with EOS and what it has done for our business that I have become an EOS implementer myself, and I'm now a professional EOS implementer, helping other businesses to implement those tools and find the same level of freedom that we did within our company. So I'm very passionate about that. And so that's basically all of the books that I want to recommend for 2025, why I want to recommend them, and what their relevance is to family business. I really think that if you just put these 5 books on your reading list for 2025, we have Entrusted, we have the Family Business Handbook by Harvard Business Review, we have Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, we have The Fourth Turning, and we have Traction by Gino Wickman. Put those 5 books on your 2025 reading list. Watch and just enforce them in your business, enforce them in your life, or put them into your livelihood, and just watch how they level up the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle that you have in your family business. So if you know of anybody who really, needs to know about this reading list or might benefit from this show, please share it with them. In the meantime, please subscribe. Please rate this show. It helps get the message out there, and it helps us to talk more and get the message of more of the non-traditional, but the super important family business dynamics that we need to start talking about. We need to talk about more in our business world. We make up 60+% of the GDP as family businesses, and we've got to make sure that we're having the important conversations like preparedness, like family mental health, like all of the things that we're talking about here. And it is not just about estate planning, ladies and gentlemen. It is about so much more than that. And success in our business is grounded in the absolute necessity that we strengthen love, legacy, and lifestyle. That leads to success in family business. And if you know people who would really benefit from that, please share this episode with them. Rate and subscribe. I'm really grateful that you took time to listen to this, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Fearless Family Business Show. If you're enjoying this show, please thumbs up this episode and subscribe wherever that subscribe button is. And you'll get more family business education and insights in your inbox. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, a colleague, a spouse, your mom, your dad, a second cousin, whomever you think might benefit from hearing this show. And if you're in a family business and you've got a great story to share, contact me because I would love to see if you'd be a great fit for this show. I'd love to interview you. Or if you're struggling in your family business to find your unique identity or voice, or you need an injection of new life into your family business, I'd also love to hear from you. I'd love to learn more about you, and I'd love to see if I can help. Simply email me at adam@fearlessfamilybusiness.com, and we'll get you connected to the right place. Together, we can elevate the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle we all experience in our family businesses. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.